When my son handed me that cardboard box and told me to pack my things, I didn't cry. I was 67 years old and I had learned a long time ago that some pain sits too deep for tears. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have imagined standing in the hallway of the house I'd owned for 31 years, was that inside that same cardboard box, buried under a wool blanket my late wife had knitted, was a cashier's check for $980,000 and a handwritten note that would change everything I thought I knew about my own family. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where this really started. I worked for the city of Atlanta for 34 years. Department of Water Management. Not glamorous, but steady. When you're a black man raising a family in the South, steady is everything. My wife, Carol, God rest her soul, she was an elementary school teacher over in Decatur. Between the two of us, we did all right. We paid off the house on Briarcliff Road in 2009. We put our son through Georgia Tech. We never took a vacation we couldn't afford. Carol passed from pancreatic cancer in the spring of 2019, 41 years of marriage, and then one Tuesday morning in March, she was just gone. I won't dwell on that grief here. Some things don't have words. What I will tell you is that after she died, the house got very quiet. Our son, I'll call him my son, because that's what he is to me, blood and bone. He started calling more often, coming around on weekends, and I was grateful. Lord knows I was grateful. His name is Marcus. I'm not calling him that anymore. I'll call him my son, because even after everything, he is still my son. But his wife, I'll call her what she was to me during those years, a stranger who learned very quickly how to smile. Her name was Deja. She was from somewhere up north, Chicago, I think, and she had a way of talking that made everything sound like a business proposal. She wasn't cruel in the obvious way. She was cruel in the quiet way, the way that takes years before you even realize what's been happening. They got married in 2018, a year before Carol died. Big wedding out in Roswell. I helped pay for part of it because that's what you do. You don't think about it. You just open your wallet because your son is happy and that's all that matters. After Carol passed, they started coming around the house more. At first I thought it was love, my son checking on his daddy, making sure the old man was eating right, wasn't rattling around alone in that big house. Then one Sunday evening in October of 2020, my son sat down at the kitchen table where his mother used to grade papers on Friday nights, and he said, "Dad, Deja and I have been talking. We think it might be a good idea for you to have some company, some help around the house." I looked at him. I said, "I'm 65, son, not 95. He smiled. It was the smile I'd learned later to recognize, the one that meant the decision had already been made. They moved in the following February, claimed it was temporary, their lease was up, they were looking for something in Brookhaven. Prices were crazy. You know how the market is, Dad. I didn't fight it. I told myself it would be good. House wouldn't feel so empty. What I didn't expect was what came with them. Deja had opinions about everything. The way I sorted mail, the food I kept in the refrigerator, the television programs I watched. She never said anything directly. She was too smart for that. She would just sigh, or say something to my son, just loud enough for me to hear, or reorganize the kitchen, and then explain very patiently why her system made more sense. My son stopped pushing back on her somewhere around month 3. I watched it happen in real time and didn't know what to do about it. She had a talent for making him feel like any disagreement with her was actually him failing her. So he stopped disagreeing, and then he started agreeing with everything she said, including things about me. They started managing my finances by accident, or so it seemed. First, it was just helping me navigate the online banking portal, because I'll admit technology was never my strength. Then it was consolidating the accounts to make things simpler. Then one afternoon I asked my son where the statements for my pension were being sent, and he said, very carefully, "Deja's been handling all of that, Dad. It's just easier." I should have said something then. I know that now. But there is a particular trap that comes with age. You start to believe that needing help means you have to accept whatever shape the help takes. The house came up in early 2022. Deja brought it up one evening when I was sitting on the back porch watching the light go down behind the oak trees. She sat across from me with her iced tea and her careful voice and said that she and my son had been doing some research. The neighborhood had appreciated significantly. The house was probably worth well over $1 million now. Had I ever thought about downsizing? A condo would be so much easier to maintain. Less yard, less worry. I said I wasn't interested in selling. She nodded like she'd expected that. Like it was a phase I was going through. Over the next 8 months, it became a campaign. Not loud, not aggressive, just persistent. A water heater issue that could have been fixed for $1,200 became a sign that the whole infrastructure was failing. A crack in the driveway became a liability. Every conversation about the future somehow circled back to the house and how holding on to it was actually working against me. My son stopped defending my position entirely. When I brought it up to him privately, he said, "Dad, she's just trying to look out for you. She knows about this stuff." I asked him what stuff she knew about. He didn't have a good answer. The breaking point came in January 2023. I came home from a doctor's appointment. Routine checkup, I was fine, and found a real estate agent in my living room. A woman I had never met, sitting on Carol's couch, with a folder of comparable for sales and a very warm handshake. My son was there. Deja was there. They were already talking square footage. I stood in the doorway of my own home and felt something I can only describe as vertigo, like the floor was tilting beneath me and everything I'd built was sliding toward an edge I couldn't see. I asked everyone to leave. The agent left quickly. She could read the room. Deja did not leave quickly. She stood in the hallway and said, in that even voice of hers, "You can't live in a house just because of what it means. You have to think practically." I looked at her and said, "This house means my wife. This house means 31 years. Don't talk to me about practically." She looked at my son. My son looked at his shoes. They moved out 2 weeks later. Not all at once, strategically, a few boxes at a time. And when they were mostly gone, my son came to me and said they'd been pre-approved for a house in Brookhaven and they'd need to use the money I'd set aside for him. The college fund. The money Carol and I had saved for decades against the possibility of emergency. He said it like it was obvious, like of course that money was his, had always been his, was just waiting to be claimed. I didn't fight it. I don't know why. Maybe I was tired. Maybe I still believed he was the boy I raised, and this was just a difficult season. I signed the paperwork my son put in front of me. $240,000. They were in Brookhaven by spring. That summer was the loneliest I can remember since the weeks after Carol died. I rattled around that house on Briarcliff Road, and the silence was a different kind now. Not the silence of loss, but the silence of being used and set aside. My daughter, my son's older sister, who lives up in Charlotte, called me every Sunday. I didn't tell her what had happened right away. I didn't want to start a war in the family. I kept saying things were fine. She kept saying I didn't sound fine. She would sometimes call on a Wednesday for no reason, except that she'd been thinking about me, and I would sit in the kitchen and hear Carol's voice under hers and try to remember what it felt like to have people in your corner. There's something I want you to understand. I am not a foolish man. I spent 34 years managing infrastructure budgets and union contracts. And I can read a spreadsheet and negotiate a service agreement, and I have never in my life bounced a check. What happened to me wasn't about intelligence, it was about grief and trust, and the particular blindness that comes from wanting to believe your own child loves you as much as you love him. In October 2023, they came back. Not to live, not yet, but they just started calling again. Friendly now, apologetic in a sideways kind of way. Inviting me to dinner, sending pictures of their new house. My son called to say he'd been thinking and he felt like things had gotten tense and maybe we could start fresh. I said yes, because he was my son, because Carol would have said yes. But I also called my daughter in Charlotte. And for the first time, I told her everything. She was quiet for a long time after I finished. Then she said, "Daddy, I need you to listen to me. I've been watching this happen and I didn't say enough and I'm sorry for that. But I need you to do something for me. I need you to see an attorney before you agree to anything else." I said I didn't think it had gotten that far. She said, "It's already that far." My daughter had, it turned out, been doing her own research. She was an accountant by trade, had been for 20 years, and when I'd mentioned the pension statements over the phone 8 months earlier, she'd started paying attention in a way I hadn't understood. She had kept notes, dates, amounts I'd mentioned in passing. She had talked to a friend of hers who was a probate and elder law attorney in Atlanta. I didn't know any of this while I was rattling around in that house, feeling sorry for myself. In November, my daughter drove down from Charlotte on a Saturday and took me to lunch at this little place near Emory that Carol and I used to go to for anniversaries. She set a folder down on the table between us and I looked at it for a moment before I opened it. What was inside made my chest tighten in a way that had nothing to do with my heart condition. She had documentation, bank records, transfer logs, account activity from the period when Deja had been helping with the finances. There were transfers I hadn't authorized, not large enough to trigger automatic flags, small enough to look like bill payments, management fees, convenience charges. Over 22 months, they added up to just over $60,000, moved out of accounts with my name on them into accounts I didn't recognize. I sat there in that restaurant where Carol and I used to share the salmon, and I thought about how much $60,000 was. That was 2 years of Carol's teaching salary. That was the roof we'd replaced in 2014. That was money I had earned one paycheck at a time over decades. My daughter put her hand over mine and said, "Daddy, we're going to fix this." I said, "How do you fix something like this?" She said, carefully. The attorney her friend had recommended was a woman named Miss Watkins out of a firm in Midtown. She had the kind of quiet that made you feel like everything was going to be handled. She reviewed everything my daughter had brought, and then she told me what our options were, and what the risks were, and what the likely outcomes were, and she didn't sugarcoat a single thing. She said if we moved forward, it was going to be difficult. My son's name was on some of those accounts. His fingerprints weren't on most of the transactions. Deja had been careful about that. But proving what had happened would require time and a forensic accountant and potentially depositions. I said, "What if I just want to make sure it stops and I get back what was taken?" She said that was a reasonable place to start. Over the next 4 months, Miss Watkins worked. My daughter flew down twice and handled things remotely the rest of the time. They quietly removed Deja's access to everything. They changed account numbers. They documented what had happened with enough specificity that when the conversation came, there would be no room to argue. My son called me in February, wanting to talk about the future of the house. I think Deja had coached him on what to say. He talked about estate planning, about how it might make sense to transfer the deed while I was still healthy enough to make decisions. He used phrases like proactive planning and avoiding probate complications. I listened to all of it. I said I'd think about it. I called Ms. Watkins the next morning. We were ready by March. My daughter came back to Atlanta. She didn't tell me everything she'd arranged. She just said she had some things to take care of and that I should trust her and take care of myself for a few days. On a Thursday afternoon in March, my son and Deja came to the house. They had a notary with them, a man I'd never seen before, and a document they wanted me to sign, a quitclaim deed. "Just to make things simpler," my son said. "Just to make sure everything was protected." I sat down at the kitchen table where Carol used to grade papers. I said, "Before we do anything, I think we should talk about the accounts." Deja's face didn't change. My sons did. I told them what my daughter had found. I told them what Ms. Watkins had documented. I told them about the $60,000 and the 22 months and the transfers that had gone somewhere that wasn't a bill and wasn't a fee and wasn't anything I had approved. The notary was looking at his hands. Deja said very calmly, "Those were management expenses. You authorized me to handle the finances. There's nothing wrong here." I said, "Then you'll be able to show documentation for all of it." She said she'd have to look into it. I said, "Messrs. Watkins already has." What happened over the next 3 weeks I am not going to describe in detail because my son is still my son and some things belong to the family. What I will tell you is that there was a negotiation, that Deja retained her own attorney, that certain things were said that cannot be unsaid, that in the end, because Miss Watkins had built a case that was more thorough than Deja had anticipated, the money was returned. All $60,000 plus interest paid in a structured arrangement that Miss Watkins insisted on and enforced. My son came to the house alone one evening in April. He sat at the kitchen table where I'd sat when I was telling him what I knew. He was quiet for a long time. He looked like a man who had woken up and wasn't sure how much of what he'd done was his choice. I didn't lecture him. I wasn't capable of it. I was 67 years old and I was tired. And he was still my son. He said, "Dad, I'm sorry." I said, "I know you are." He said, "I don't know how I let it get that far." I said, "I do know. I watched it happen, and I blame myself for not saying something sooner." We sat there in that kitchen for a long time without talking. The refrigerator hummed. The neighbor's dog barked twice and stopped. Outside, the dogwood Carol had planted in 2003 was starting to bloom. I said, "Your mother loved this house." He said, "I know." I said, "I'm not selling it." He said very quietly, "I know, Dad. I know." Now here's the part I told my daughter I wasn't going to talk about publicly. But I've thought about it for months, and I think it needs to be said. About 2 weeks after the negotiations settled, I was cleaning out the closet in the guest room, the room my son and his wife had used, and I found a shoebox on the top shelf that I didn't recognize. Inside was a sealed envelope with my name on it, in my daughter's handwriting. My hands were shaking when I opened it. Inside the envelope was a cashier's check for $980,000 made out to me, and a letter. The letter was 3 pages, handwritten, and it started like this: "Daddy, if you're reading this, it means the plan worked and you're still in your house." I need to explain some things. She explained that after I'd told her everything on that Sunday phone call, she had gone to her own financial advisor and her attorney and her husband, and they had made a decision as a family. She had been quietly liquidating investments she'd held for years. A rental property she and her husband had owned in Huntersville, some retirement accounts she'd been contributing to since her 20s, and she had converted it all to a cashier's check in my name, which she had hidden in that closet during her February visit. The letter said, "I did this because I was afraid. I was afraid that even with Ms. Watkins and the documentation, something would go wrong. I was afraid that you were going to lose the house. I was afraid that I was going to let you down the way your son did. I was afraid of becoming someone who watched their father lose everything and did nothing. So I did something. This money is yours. Not a loan, not a gift with conditions. Yours, because you spent your whole life making sure we had what we needed. And I am not going to let you spend your old age worrying about your home." She also wrote, "Don't call me crying. I can't handle it." I called her crying. She cried too. Her husband got on the phone and said gruffly that he wanted me to know it had been both of their decision and that I should stop thanking them and just cash the check. I laughed for the first time in what felt like months. I am still in my house on Briarcliff Road. The dogwood is fully in bloom now. I drink my coffee on the back porch and watch the light come through the oak trees the same way it always did. And I talk to Carol sometimes, not out loud, just in the way you do when someone has been part of you for so long that the conversation never really stopped. My son and I are still finding our way back to each other. It's slow, it's real. Some damage takes time. But he calls on Sundays now just to talk. No agenda, no proposals. Last week he asked me about the stories Carol used to tell about her grandmother in Alabama. Stories he'd apparently half listened to as a teenager and now wanted to actually know. I talked for almost an hour. He listened the whole time. I don't know what Dija does now. I don't need to know. I know what my daughter does. She is in Charlotte, going to work every morning, coming home to her family every evening, and every Sunday she calls her father to make sure he's all right. She is more than all right. And so, for the first time in a long time, am I. There is something I keep coming back to, that comment I got once, the one that said sometimes people mistake kindness for weakness. I've thought about that a lot. I spent a lot of years believing that keeping the peace was the same as being at peace. It is not. There is a difference between being a patient man and being a man who has been made to be patient for someone else's benefit. The house is paid for. The accounts are in my name alone. My daughter is on the emergency contact list, the power of attorney, and the speed dial. And last Saturday, I sat at the kitchen table where Carol used to grade papers on Friday nights. With the sun coming through the window the way it always does in April in Atlanta. And I thought, I built a good life. And I am going to finish it on my own terms. That's what I want you to take from this, if you take anything. Not the drama. Not the money, not the legal battle, or the betrayal, or the reconciliation. Just this. The people who really love you will show you. Not with words, and not when it's easy, and not when everything is fine. They'll show you when it's hard, and when it costs them something, and when there's no guarantee it's going to work. My daughter showed me, and I will spend the rest of my life being worthy of that.